The story or stories you are about to hear are to entertain. The writers of these stories may claim they are true, yet they may not be. That is up to you to decide. After all, this world is a strange one. The river flows past. A light breeze lifts and lowers the line. Not a lot of bites today, but it doesn't matter. With your back against a tree, lichen and moss cushioning you just right, you begin to doze off. But maybe this is a bad idea, you think to yourself, reminding yourself of the rumors told to you by the owner of that small bait and tackle store you stopped at on the way here. But you've never been one to give in to urban legends. So you close your eyes for a while. The sound of splashing water seizes your attention. You yank yourself up and look to the river's edge. The upper half of a face stares back at you from the bank. A face with skin like wrought and colored the same as the moon. She begins to crawl out of the water. Enjoy these allegedly true and scary fishing stories. If you have your own creepy experience, send it to us at darkstories.org. I'd love to narrate it. I'm specifically looking for hunting stories. Now, let's begin. New Breed from Twilighborn. 3 nights ago, I encountered something that goes beyond logical sense. I was out on one of my regular night walks. I always end up meeting a few new people every now and then. That night, I stumbled across 3 fishermen who were sitting under a bridge, enjoying the water and what it had to offer. I casually greeted them, asking if they caught anything as an icebreaker. They laughed with a no, not a single bite, apparently. It was then that I noticed a flashlight on the other side of the bridge. It was on, but I didn't see anyone near it. Instinctively, I asked these fishermen if they knew anything about that. Perhaps they'd been fishing on that side and had forgotten their flashlight. They replied, letting me know it wasn't any of theirs, which makes sense. They would have definitely noticed a flashlight left on if they had forgotten it. They explained that they saw a man go down over there and set it up, as if he was getting ready to fish, yet he hadn't come back yet with his fishing rod. They said it was awful weird, because he'd been gone a while. They seemed a bit concerned, and a little scared. Believe it or not, they said, this was 4 hours ago. Well, what if the guy got hurt? I asked. Should we go check on him? The men shook their heads almost in unison. One of them hesitantly spoke up. We would, but, well, there's something over there. Something over there? What do you mean by that? I asked. We're not sure, he replied. But it's pretty big. To be honest, friend, even with the 3 of us, we're kinda scared to go over there. Maybe they were right. Maybe there was something dangerous on the other side. But to me, I had all the more reason to go check this out, to make sure no one was hurt. I wasn't really afraid, but then again, I hadn't seen this supposed figure myself. As I went to check it out, the oldest of the fishermen said, "That's a bad idea. Might get yourself hurt." I laughed, telling them I grew up around nature like this, and I wasn't too worried about it. I climbed up the bridge and crossed it alone. I got down where the other person had supposedly been, where the flashlight was. I could see the 3 still sitting on the other side, keeping an eye on me, no problem. But as I was looking back at them, I noticed that they weren't just looking at me. The 3 men were now pointing and shouting. Before I could make out what they were saying, I heard branches snapping behind me. I grabbed the flashlight from the ground. I scoured the area with the light's beam, and I found on the ground a broken fishing pole. The guy had come back with his rod, but why was it here? Why was it broken? And where was he? My thoughts were then interrupted by a low and menacing growl. It sounded like some kind of dog. I turned to face it, reminding myself to not show fear, to be brave. But that was nearly impossible to do, because when I turned, the flashlight beaming on this animal's face, it wasn't a typical dog I was greeted with. This, on all fours, was just as tall as I was, and I'm 5'9". I'd never seen a dog so big, and it was close. I knew if I ran then, it would attack me, and I was worried that if I attacked or tried to scare it, it would just encourage it to attack me more. I looked it dead in the eyes, and without really thinking, I spoke to it like a person would a normal dog. I'm not here to hurt you, buddy. I'm just gonna be on my way, okay? To my surprise, the animal took a few steps back. I began to make my way back where I came from. My body was tensed up, and I think I was starting to sweat. I made it back to the 3 fishermen, who were standing up, horrified. One of them asked, "What was that?" "It looked like a dog. You're lucky it didn't attack you." I gave them an uneasy smile. "I guess I've always had a knack with animals," I said. I stayed with the 3 fishermen, who had asked me to stay with them until they were finished. They enjoyed my company, but I think we all were thinking the same thing: safety in numbers. After trying my best to find a dog breed that grew that massive, I came up empty-handed. No matter how much I looked it up, I couldn't find an image anywhere that even closely resembled that dog. Maybe it's an entirely new breed. Maybe some sort of evolution of wild dog. Maybe a record-breaking sized wolf that's still alive and well out here. All I can say for certain is that thing stood 5'9" on all fours. It was muscular like a pit bull, with coarse hair like a gray wolf, and its eyes, when I pointed that flashlight in them, they reflected red. If you ever come across anything like this, be cautious and try your best not to show fear or anger, and apparently maybe even talking to it calmly works. Dogs are dogs, after all. Well, unless that thing wasn't a dog at all. She Who Sobs, from Sami. My best friend and I had decided to go fishing one weekend. It began as usual. We had a nice session of fishing and packed our stuff up. We decided we'd be camping for the night in a desolate forest. My friend was the type of person that would cry at even the slightest noise, but I assured him it was safe. I'd never had anything to worry about out here, especially if you're careful. But this time, I was dead wrong. It didn't take us long to fall asleep after such a long day. It was late into the night, maybe around 3 or so, when I woke up to the sound of crying, a hushed sob. I shook my head, thinking it was just some animal's sound, until that sob turned into a screeching cry. Instantly, as that sound reverberated through the air, I felt a rush of anxiety just devour my heart whole. I looked toward my friend. He sat there, frozen, as awake as I was, but too afraid to move. We were a couple of scared statues. With the help of some adrenaline, I got up and unzipped the tent. Outside, I saw a face. This was beyond my comprehension. The the face shifted shape so quickly that from one moment you would be fooled into thinking she were a beautiful woman, and the next she would be some sort of demon incarnate, if you could even call it that. Its facial features were mangled, making it impossible to really evaluate. I stared, frozen. I didn't know what to do. Suddenly, my friend grabbed me by the arm, and we made a run for it, leaving behind everything in our campsite. It was a moment in my life that I'll never forget. Her face still haunts my mind every second of the day, even if it changed like the wind. Unknown Entity, from Drew. This story is about my uncle's encounter with something unknown. It was spring of 2018. We lived in a small village in the northeastern part of India at the time. Many people of that village were their family's sole breadwinners. To help feed our family, my uncle and dad would usually go fishing in the river. The river is roughly 5 kilometers away from the village, but it still stretched quite a bit further. Sometimes they would even have to camp the night away in the riverbank and would return in the next morning. There's a spot on the riverbank which most fishermen avoid. They say the place gives off bad vibes. There's a small stream up the river, but the water there is muddy. It's all black and yellow in color. Looked more like iron rust. Our forefathers always warned us about those waters, to avoid them at all costs. Honestly, I don't know if my uncle is a few screws loose or stupidly brave, because sometimes he would go camping alone in the places our people would avoid. One day he set out to the river to camp at night. When it got dark, he set up camp in that very spot I mentioned before, with the rusty-looking water. He lit a fire, cooked some food that he had, and warmed himself up. When it happened, it caught him by surprise. He felt a chill, which he said should have been impossible. He said he was only a foot away from the fire, and then he heard a laugh coming from behind him, a laugh that was sinister. He froze, not sure what was going on. Most fishermen would already be gone this late, and those that did have to camp overnight would never be caught dead camping in that spot. But as I said earlier, my uncle is crazily brave, so he turned around to see who was with him. There he saw what he described as a pale humanoid-looking figure sitting on the rock. It was laughing at him. My uncle was scared, but tried to act normal. And so he began to turn his back on the thing, trying to ignore it. As soon as he did, an even colder sensation went across his back, as if someone had rubbed an ice cube along his skin. As you could already guess, this pale humanoid thing was touching his back. At that moment, my uncle panicked. He grabbed his knife and turned around, ready to confront the thing. But the creature ran to the river and jumped across it, which was about a 9-meter leap. My uncle picked up stones, throwing them at the animal, and warning the thing to not return to his campsite. Not too long later, he heard a howl or scream from the cliff on the other side of the bank. It was clear the thing was mad. Right before my uncle's eyes, he claimed that the creature grew in size to such an extent that it was able to grab a small tree like a twig. It smacked the river with the tree, causing a colossal splash. My uncle was soaked. Without wasting time, he packed things up, and while he was doing so, the creature stood on the cliff, watching him, not moving an inch. He was lucky it had no intention of hurting him. If it wanted to, my uncle would have been dead. He ran back home without looking back and said that he'll never go back there again. Lake Monster Sighting from Coonnar. I've lived in the Appalachian Mountains all my life, and I'd been a Boy Scout for a while. This happened a couple of months ago at a popular camp to go to summer camp at. The first night we arrived there, we went to the lodge and went to bed. It had been a long day. The next morning, we got most of our planning done for the rest of the year, so they let us go out and do whatever we wanted for our break. Me and another scout member went fishing at the nearby lake. It fed directly from the river but was part of the camp. He and I were fishing on a dock where the river and the lake met. I was sitting on the dock, looking down below me since the water was clear. I liked watching the fish and seeing just what kind of fish there were in there. I soon took notice of what appeared to be a dead tree branch under the dock in the water. But as I watched it, it was suddenly yanked away by something I couldn't see. It made me jump at first, but then I figured it was probably taken by the current in the water. So I continued fishing and watching the water. Not too long later, the two of us changed locations. I had a dead crawfish hooked when I reeled in my lure, and it fell off when I was trying to get it in. I tried to get it back with the end of my rod. I was planning to prank another troop member with it. The water was a lot less clear in this new area than it was at the dock, so I had to feel around for it. When, out of nowhere, I felt something jerk on the rod. I almost fell in, but luckily I was firmly planted on the ground. I looked in the water, and I kid you not, there was a hand on my fishing rod. I jerked the rod away from whatever or whoever was in the water. In doing so, I jerked the thing closer and got a good look at it. It was dark green in color, with what looked to be scales on it, and it had fins all over it. Its face gave me a few nightmares. It was almost like a person's, but it had no nose, and its eyes, well, I didn't see its eyes. They were either deep in its head, or not there at all. All I could see were two deep, dark pits. It had a snout full of needle-like teeth. I quickly got up and ran over to my friend, telling him we needed to leave. I made up a story since I knew he wouldn't believe me if I told him. We went back to the lodge. The rest of our stay there, I was paranoid about the lake and the river. I was scared that it could come on land and it would find me. After we left, I haven't gone back to that lake, and if they ever plan on going back to that camp again, I'd rather avoid it. I never knew anything like that existed in this world. Mia's Mothman from Jayleaf. This happened in Mio, Michigan. On June 4th, 2019, me and my friends were planning on a trip to go up north of Michigan to stay at a cabin and do some fishing. It was going to be a 3-hour ride. It would be me, 2 friends from high school, and a girl I'd met recently, which I was beginning to catch feelings for. We were all in the car driving up to the cabin, smoking, laughing, and just talking, the usual. 3 hours later, we're in town, and we all stop at the gas station before we went to the cabin, as the nearest town was 6 miles away. In the gas station getting snacks, I started to get this weird feeling, a feeling of impending doom and dread. I nearly had a panic attack, and I didn't know why. We got back in the car after doing our bit of shopping, but for some reason I was beginning to feel cold from the inside out. I just didn't know why. There seemed to be no reason for it. When we arrived at the cabin, we unpacked, and as soon as we got done with that, My friend Aaron went to go fish since there was a lake in the backyard. My other friend Ryan started drinking. Fast forward to 11:50 p.m. That feeling of dread suddenly came back. I couldn't shake it off this time. It was like someone was watching me. I decided to go outside where Aaron was. As I walked out the door, a huge gust of wind hit me. I remember wondering what in the world was with this wind as I lit up another smoke. I looked down at the ground for a second, and when I looked back up, I saw this massive winged silhouette above me. Within the next 2 seconds, I hear this raging screeching sound, like 1,000 men were dying around me. The dread came back tenfold. When I looked up in the nearby trees, searching for the silhouette once more, trying to find what made the noise, I found 2 light bulb-sized eyes, glowing red, peering down at me. I looked into those eyes for what felt like an eternity. And as quick as it had appeared, the creature jumped off the branch and flew away, soon disappearing. It came from the ocean, from Andro6657. This happened in 1993. I was around 12 years old. My Uncle Max picked me up and took me fishing with him. He had a decent-sized boat with a good engine. We weren't going out far, but I figured we'd be gone most of the day. We started early, around 5 a.m., then drove around in the boat, looking at the coastal area before we began to fish. We located a good spot next to an oil platform-looking structure in the water. It was still a bit dark, but we could see the supplies in the boat without a flashlight or any other lighting. We'd only been fishing for about 10 minutes when we heard a bump on the bottom of the boat. It almost moved the boat. I looked at my uncle and shrugged my shoulders. He said, "It's probably some big turtle," and snickered at me. I laughed, because just hearing my uncle cuss was enough for me back then. But before we could even finish laughing, there was an odd and large splash. I turned to my right to see the weirdest thing I'd ever seen in my life. There was this creature. It was like a man, but his skin was like that of an old fish, like a coelacanth's skin. Brown, scaly skin covered the thing. It had white eyes and a gaping mouth. I swear I even saw fins on him, but it happened so fast, I wasn't sure. It had shot straight up out of the water, about chest high, then sank right back down again. I was shocked, felt like my heart stopped. In my mind, I thought it had to have been a prank or something. It surely couldn't have been a real creature, could it? It was a little darker, but I swear that I saw the shadow of that creature swimming off underneath the water, like a dolphin. My heart was racing as I looked back at my uncle. The expression on his face, that scared me even more. I'd never before seen him scared, not like that. I trembled there on the boat. Without a sound, the 2 of us left the coastal waters. Something's down there, from Fat Rabbit 61614. Back when I was young, I used to live near a huge river situated under a gorge. Well, not exactly near. It was technically a street and a field away. But that didn't stop me and my cousins from going there to explore, much to the dismay of our overprotective parents, especially when I tell you why. This story isn't so much about me, but about my uncle, who lived particularly close to the river. He was an outdoorsman, but the rugged, one-with-nature type. You could tell from his tanned, muscular body that this guy had done his fair share of manual labor, and he has the power and skills to prove it. His particular hobby was fishing, and not in the traditional boat and reel kind. He and some of his buddies did so by taking the inner tube of what looked to be a truck tire, and they used that as a flotation device, lying on top of it while they paddled and dragged a net around. For some reason, this worked because, as he said, fish aren't as spooked by what would appear as flotsam to them. Incidentally, this is how he primarily provided for his family. Anyway, the river itself, it was pretty wide, with foot-deep shallow parts that most people can walk straight through to the other side. The current on these parts weren't particularly strong, and the sediment was pretty solid, so you had no real danger of slipping or getting stuck. But some parts? Well, they were as deep as 25 feet and pretty murky, and these were where the current was strangely strong. These parts are actually the same spots my uncle and his buddies fished. Now, it won't come as any surprise that some people have drowned in this river. Heck, that's what our parents back then were afraid of, because we were just small kids near a really dangerous expanse of water. And of course, there were the stories. One in particular came from my uncle himself, about a kid who swam around the deep parts and suddenly got dragged down. Not swept away by the current, not cramps, but dragged down. He'd play up this story by saying it was a shokoi, a malevolent merman who prowls deep water for people to drown. Of course, only the most impressionable of us kids believed him, until he himself had his own personal story to tell. He told us that one day he was fishing with two of his buddies, and like always, they were at the deep part of the river. That day the current was pretty strong, but their inner tubes were anchored on the riverbank, so they weren't getting dragged far from their spots. Only he was slightly distanced from his buddies on account of his rope anchor being too long. He said after a while, he felt his inner tube jolt harder than what the current was initially capable of. He tried steadying himself best he could, but the more he fidgeted around to balance himself, the more difficult it got. Then he suddenly slid off. No, what he told us was that he felt his inner tube being pulled right out from under him. Instantly, he was underwater. While this was nothing new, he was a great swimmer after all. He felt like he was being weighed down by something. He could not see very well from the murky river water, but he swears he saw some dark shadow around his legs, preventing him from kicking up and treading water. The fact that he had little time to draw breath before he went under was not making it easier. Fortunately, one of his friends had seen him go under, and when he saw my uncle thrash about a little, which they said he never did, because that would spook the fish, he quickly went closer and yanked my uncle up to surface level. After that, my uncle was able to kick free from whatever it was holding him down, and they all went back to the riverbank to rest. When asked what happened, all my uncle told his friends was that something was dragging him down, and he had no idea what it was. They decided that that was enough fishing for one day, and retreated back to much more solid ground. That story was more than enough to scare me and the more sensible of us kids into not going to the river, especially when the current was too strong. If someone like my uncle, who practically grew up in the water, nearly died, what chance did we have? Of course, that wasn't the end of that, because over the years, we still heard about people drowning in that river under mysterious circumstances. My uncle still fishes there to this day, but at his age, he's more than glad to stay on dry land and just use a fishing rod. But he never casts anywhere near the spot that he almost got dragged under to his doom. Something's down there, he said, and I'm not gonna tempt it to try again. If you're going fishing, try not to go alone, because if you find yourself being pulled under, there may be no one around to pull you back up. Good night. If you enjoyed this episode of Darkness Prevails, be sure to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If you have a story of your own you'd like to share, send it to us at darkstories.org. I'm looking for creepy hunting experiences. If you want to support the show, check the links in the description. Now here are the credits to my amazing patrons who continue to donate. They're awesome. Remember, stay safe out there and stay creepy, because this world is a strange one.